Hello, everybody. A little early, that's okay. Get everything pulled up. All right, so today with me, live with Kevin, we're talking about food and whether or not we should give our dogs food if they're anxious when left home alone. Um, I know that, I guess, like a decade ago when I first got into training, and before I had any sort of formal training on separation anxiety, I definitely thought the way to do it was with food. And I remember um, throwing some food down in like a Kong and giving it to the dog and leaving and thinking this is working. But I want to talk about why it wasn't working and why it doesn't really work, um, and why maybe it would. We'll kind of go through all that. I don't want to tease you too much. So here we go, though. So you know, if you have an anxious dog, I think this would be helpful for you. It's going to be a lot of like what not to do's. So it might not be um, super helpful in like solving the issue for you, but that's also not necessarily what lives are all about. It's kind of hard to solve issues without, doing a consultation. So let's dive in. So in this training, you will learn why food may or may not help. So there's that. You're also going to learn other recommendations that aren't typically effective. So I figured, let's talk about the food thing, but some other recommendations that some trainers will make, or your friends might tell you to do, or things you read online. So I want to dive into that as well. The reason why I am doing some of this stuff now is because I'm finishing up this SA Pro Trainer um, program. So I'm wanting to get as much knowledge as possible on it. So therefore, as we start to offer this to clients, it's based on proven stuff that works and not just kind of using my intuition. So let's go. So common suggestions that I have heard, that I've given a long time ago. I like to throw myself under the bus, but things that I've done as well. Like food is a common suggestion. Give them food, that'll solve it. Or just really exercise them a lot, that'll solve it. Or, your problem is you are making a big deal when you are leaving or when you're coming back. So those are some common suggestions. So food, lots of exercise, or to completely ignore. If anybody has any questions, feel free to leave them. I've got my comment thing pulled up over here, so I can watch. But let's dive in. So food is kind of the main thing that we'll be talking about with all that. But some examples of food. So stuffed Kongs. I think most pet owners have heard of a Kong. This Dalmatian has a Kong in his mouth. It's like a snowman shaped thing, depending on which way you're looking at it. And you can stuff a lot of different food items in there. So they're fantastic. There's a lot of other toys that probably are very similar, but we're just going to use the term Kong for it. So stuffed Kongs. Another form of, it's not traditional food, like something that they would just consume, but like bully sticks are another thing that someone may try, a bully stick or like a rawhide or something like that. That's something that they're basically going to chew on, and it's going to take them a little while to get through it. And then another example of food, or something to do with food, would be food toys. So there are a lot of different toys that you can stick food in. And so sometimes people are trying to feed their dog his or her meal in a food toy in the crate, which could be great depending on what we're talking about. But it may not be for anxiety. But just another example, food toys. There are so many on the market. But the idea is just something that involves food that's going to occupy their time. These are just some examples. So will it work? Will it work? Drum roll, please. Most likely not. So why not? I want to talk about that now, but most likely it will not work. And a couple of reasons why. One, if you're using food to try to help your dog have a better association with you leaving, technically you're giving the food before you're leaving, which means that your dog is not going to build any sort of positive association with you being gone. So food comes first, you leave second. What you're going to see is a lot of dogs actually, maybe in the early stages, they do consume it a little bit, but what generally starts to happen is dogs figure out, oh, you're giving me that stuffed Kong. I know what happens next. That means you leave me here in the crate, or even maybe out in the house, you leave me here. And so their stomachs turn off. I don't know about you, but whenever I've dealt with anxiety, the last thing I want to do is eat. So as soon as the food is now predicting the departure, or not necessarily the departure, but the fact that you are going, your dog is going to go, yeah, no thanks, and not even as thought out as that. Like, no, I'm not eating that. I know it's really like the emotion changes. Like, oh, that turns my stomach off. So the food is happening before the departure is one of the common things. And if you think about it, it is very hard to switch the order of events. I mean, technically, we would need you to leave and be gone, and then the food would start. And then technically, if we made it work somehow, then our dogs could look forward to us leaving because that means that they're getting something awesome. But it is very hard to do because if you give it to them, then you leave, you are giving it to them, and that's predicting you leaving. So that scraps that. There are some food, like dispensing toys that can work that you basically set up the toy and then you leave, and then the toy can start dispensing randomly, like a machine. There's like Pet Tutors one, and then there's drawing a blank on the other, Manners Minder or Treat and Train. The idea though, like what if you were to say, okay, let me put it down next in your crate, let me get you in the crate, let me load it up with food, and then the food starts after I leave. The order is still backwards. Your dog is going to go, hey, all that happens, and then you leave. So like it's not going to work. It's really hard, if not impossible. For years, I've been trying to figure out a way to make it work, but even still, something I learned in the new program I'm going through, which makes a lot of sense, is that the food will run out well before you return. So if you genuinely want to change an association with something and you're going to use food for it, you want your dog to notice the thing first, and then you want the good thing to happen second. And as long as the thing is happening, the food must be continuing. So, for example, you're gone for an hour. You give your dog a stuffed Kong. Somehow magically they get the Kong after you leave, which at this point seems like it's impossible. But let's say somehow it did. It happened that way. Then your dog is going to get through the Kong in 5, 10, 15, 20 minutes. And then before you know it, the Kong is empty. There's no more food. You're still gone. So we're not keeping this like 1-to-1 ratio of you being gone and them getting food. So it makes it very, very challenging in that sense as well. And again, go back to the second bullet point, which is the food is typically happening before the departure. It's like impossible unless you come up with some sort of way to like hide food, and then you step out and then you like ring some sort of bell that teaches them that food is now, I don't know, like it's like impossible. I mean, it's not impossible, but there's, again, you have to come up with some sort of scheme to make it happen. And I don't think that's going to happen for anybody. It's not realistic. So the food is most likely going to run out before you return, and you could end up leaving them the tastiest thing in the world. And eventually, if they start to realize that it predicts your departure, then they're going to stop eating it. So food, unfortunately, most likely will not work. Yeah, I mean, I'm going to go into kind of giving y'all an idea of what will work. Now, food may work if your dog is simply not necessarily anxious in the crate, but just, maybe, I don't know, like a little frustrated that he's in there or something like that. Maybe you could give him a Kong. He eats it. He's like, oh, cool. That was great. And then falls asleep. So like maybe it would work. If you've been doing it forever and your dog is still eating it, it's probably not the end of the world to keep doing it, because if they're still eating it, that means they're probably not that anxious with you being gone. It's also can be a great reward in the sense of, hey, go to your crate. I'm going to give you something to do. I got to leave. And if your dog has no anxiety with it, it's great. Go ahead and keep doing that. I would recommend it. It's also a great way if you're like doing, crate training. There's a certain step in the plan that we go through, which consists of them working on something. So keep doing it if it's not hurting anything. But if you're trying to use it to like solve some sort of anxiety with being home alone and it's not getting any better, then I think you're kind of seeing evidence that it's not working. So unfortunately, food, generally speaking, is not going to help a dog be more comfortable or less anxious with being home alone. So let's move on. Another one is lots of exercise, and some different forms of exercise that I thought of would be like a dog park, a long walk, or some sort of long run, whether you are a runner and you take them on a run with you. Dog park's obvious, or a long walk. I mean, a long walk with lots of sniffing, I would say. Like a walk in general where they're like glued to your side and can't do anything. That's really not going to provide much enrichment. But so lots of exercise is kind of another one that people like to throw out there. Will it work? Dun, 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 dun. Well, that's what we'd hope, is like a pug sleeping on his back with his tongue out. But most likely not. It's most likely not going to work. Um, I think that the only way that it would work is if you like ran them on like 6 straight marathons or something. I mean, like it's not going to happen. And even if you gave them more exercise than they've ever had, it's still probably not going to do much. Um, uh, Energy level doesn't necessarily solve anxiety. So with that being said, most likely not. Your dog will still most likely be anxious. So I would say that's probably not going to hurt anything. I mean, I think getting dogs exercise is important to, in terms of meeting their needs. So it's really probably not going to hurt anything. But if your goal is to exercise them completely, and then give them, a stuffed Kong, it's probably not going to do much in terms of solving anxiety. The other one too is like completely ignore them. So I remember watching a video a long time ago. Some trainer basically saying that it's an easy solution for separation anxiety or anxiety in that sense is just to completely ignore them. You're making it a big deal when you come and go. Um, and I think that we could kind of downplay it a little bit. We don't have to make such a big deal out of it, but simply completely ignoring them altogether, is that going to do anything? So, I mean, the example is ignore when you leave or ignore when you return. So you basically just get up and go and you come back and you don't pay any sort of attention to them. That's kind of the general idea. Will it work? Probably not by itself. So, if you're working on like a desensitization plan, which we'll talk about in a second, and you're kind of adding in like just kind of you're doing the steps, not paying too much attention to them, it probably, isn't going to hurt anything in that sense. But if your sole, like if all you want to do is say, you know what, I'm just going to start ignoring my dog when I come and go, then that'll solve it. I don't think you're going to see much success. I think too, I've always had trouble making the suggestion of completely ignore your dog when you come home, because that's not something that I want. Like I come home and I'm excited when my dogs, like I'm excited to see them. I love when they come and greet me at the door. So I don't like the suggestion of just like act like they're not there, but not by itself. But what does work? So what can we do? Um, so something I've learned how to do, and in finishing up my program, is a plan based on desensitization. And so I'm sure everybody has heard the term desensitization, but what does it really mean in the grand scheme of things with a dog that's dealing with anxiety? We'll talk about that in a second. But what else? What else works? No more home alone time, which I think automatically, like when someone hears that, it's kind of daunting. Like, well, what? No, my dog can never be home alone. I can never leave my dog. But these are two things that really, hold on, let me go back. I went too far. These are two things that when paired together are really, really, can be very, very successful on helping a dog feel better about being home alone. So what is desensitization? Desensitization is basically, to put it in like as clean as possible, you're putting a lot of little steps together, and each step is only like a baby step more than what your dog was able to previously handle. So for example, if you can step out of your door for 5 seconds and you can come back in and your dog didn't even get up, doesn't look stressed at all, then the next step would be stepping out for 6 seconds or something to that effect, where it's these baby steps. And over time, you end up increasing more and more and more and more and more. You're not always going to be increasing in 1 second increments. That would take forever. But in the beginning, you're generally starting off with very small increments, like I don't have the info in front of me, like 10 or 20% increases in time, which is very, very tiny, tiny steps. But by doing that, and it's never going to be just like each day you add time on and it just continues to go smoothly. There's going to be some backsliding in there. So you might work your way up to like, okay, cool. I was able to leave yesterday for 5 minutes and my dog nailed it. And then today I'm going to try 5 minutes and 26 seconds. And I tried it and I'm watching on the camera and my dog is melting down at 3 minutes in. And so the step, it's never going to be perfect, but you're going to see that, it's getting better gradually. And for this to work too, the whole like no more home alone time. One thing that I learned early on when I started kind of conversing with some of the already the separation anxiety trainers that I'd already met, and I had Jackie Johnston on months ago. We did like a talk about this. It's on the YouTube page if y'all want to refer to that. But one of the things that I learned is basically we can't leave them home alone at all if we want this plan to work. And the idea is, if we are getting them to be successful at staying home for 5 minutes by themselves, and then the next day we leave for 8 hours to go to work and come back, it's going to just like wipe out everything you just did. And it's just not going to work. So there are ways to, um, Rescued by Training, Kate Lasala put out something wonderful on like a bunch of different options. And it's on her website, I'm sure. Kate, if you're watching, link it up. Um, where it gives you so many different options on ways that you can do things that you can do with your dog when you have to go to work. So like daycare, pet sitters, yada yada. Like she came up with so many that I can't even believe she was able to come up with so many. But there are lots of options on how to prevent your dog from being home alone. So that is a huge step, because again, if you're like, whoa, we made it to 10 minutes today, and then the next day you go to work for 8 hours, you're gonna like wipe out everything you just did. So that is the general idea. So there are things that work, but giving food alone, like just giving your dog food and then leaving, generally is not going to do much. You're not going to have much success with it. So the other thing I mentioned too is exercise. Just like give them as much exercise as possible. That'll solve it. Generally speaking, not going to solve the whole being anxious while home alone. And then ignoring them when you come and go. I mean, again, that's really not probably alone going to solve anything too. So what does work? A plan based on desensitization, which is a lot of baby steps and no more home alone time. Yeah. So if you feel like you need help with this, we're going to be launching something here in the very near future, talking about how you can sign up with me to do it. There's other trainers out there currently. I mentioned Jackie, which is her business is Believe in Your Dog. Kate's is Rescued by Training. Those are a couple just off the top of my head. So check them out if you need immediate help. There's a lot of help out there. So homework though. So, and I already kind of gave you a cheat here, but figure out a way to suspend absences. Basically, once again, if your dog's dealing with this, figure out a way that they're not going to be left home alone. And so I just gave you, if you're listening through all this, I'm giving you a wonderful thing to search for, which is Kate's handout. It might be a digital download, I forget, but so many ways to suspend absences, or basically, ways to, same thing, give them something, bring them somewhere or somebody to come to you where they're not home alone. So thank you all so much for watching. I hope you found this informative. And if you have any questions, feel free to leave them. I'll pop back and check out the comments. There's a delay here. So what I'm saying now, you'll see it in about 20 or 30 seconds. So if you have questions now, I'll wait a few more seconds and blabber on, see if anything comes in. But yeah, and then, in terms of using food for everything else, generally it's it's an awesome way to motivate your dog and to get them to do the things that you want them to do. I've got one here. My 6-month-old Maltese cries incessantly when I leave and while I'm gone. I have an app that allows me to check in, and I see that he's still crying on and off while I'm gone. It's heartbreaking. I try to feed my dog at least a couple of hours before I leave, but 50% of the time he throws up depending on how long I'm gone. Yeah, Molly, I mean, that sounds like a pretty, if he's vomiting, he's whining so much and vomiting while you're gone, and he's, whining the entire time. I think based on that information, I think that, he would be a good candidate for some separation anxiety training, just based on that information. If he's stressed the entire time you're gone. And again, it's a great way to help him feel at ease when home alone. So I'll put in the comments a couple of, again, because I'm not taking clients yet for this. I will be, I believe, starting in next couple months, starting in June, I think is the goal. So like a month and a half out. So most people can't wait a month and a half. So I'll put some references in the comments here. So thanks for saying that. It really is heartbreaking. I mean, I know that back in the day, my dog V definitely dealt with some of it. It was very, very light. I mean, he would, when I moved back to my parents' house when he was 3, and when they went to bed, I was working mid shift, and he'd have to be crated for 2 or 3 hours because he was young. He was going to get into trouble. And I remember him vocalizing when I'd come home. It only lasted for a little while. And then, after a few days of being in there, he would calm down after they'd put him in, but it was a struggle. It's tough. All right, everybody. Thanks for watching. Have a good rest of your day, and I will see you all next week. Take care.